The day before my sister's wedding, my mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "It would be better if you don't show up. You'll spoil everything." I remember the exact way her mouth barely moved, like she'd been rehearsing the words for weeks. The air in the room turned solid. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there holding a glass of water I no longer wanted, while my mother's verdict hung between us like a locked door. Somewhere upstairs, my sister Victoria was having her final dress fitting, laughing with her bridesmaids. The entire house reeked of luxury and something far more bitter, a sweetness masking decay. Lilies crowded every surface, their fragrance thick enough to choke on, blending with the unspoken tension that clung to the walls. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even hesitate. My fingers released the glass in my hand with quiet precision, setting it down as though nothing inside me had just fractured beyond repair. Then I picked up my bag, turned, and walked out of the only home I had ever known without once looking back. Outside, everything continued as if nothing had shifted. The driveway buzzed with quiet urgency. A sleek van from the wedding planner idled near the curb, its logo gleaming under the late afternoon sun. Workers moved with purpose beneath a massive white tent where rows of champagne flutes were being polished for hundreds of guests who would soon gather to celebrate a love story built on illusion. I passed it all like a ghost, unseen and unacknowledged. No one called my name. No one asked where I was going. Not a single voice broke through the silence that followed me as I crossed the boundary of that life for the last time. What none of them understood, what they couldn't even imagine, was that I had already begun to leave long before that moment. For 2 years, I had been living a life they knew nothing about, a quiet, hidden existence stitched together from stolen weekends and whispered conversations, from choices made without their approval. It wasn't loud or showy. It didn't need to be. It was real, and it was mine, and it was about to change everything. All my life, I had existed in the shadow of someone brighter, louder, more celebrated. Victoria wasn't just admired, she was adored, elevated, untouchable. She moved through life as though it had been custom designed for her success. Every performance, every achievement, every carefully curated appearance reinforced her position as the center of our family's universe. I, on the other hand, learned to orbit quietly at a distance, present but never truly seen. My accomplishments were footnotes, my existence an afterthought. Praise was reserved for her. Comparison was reserved for me. When she announced her engagement, the shift in the household was immediate and overwhelming. It was as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen, eager to participate in the spectacle. Plans consumed every waking moment. Conversations became strategies. Details multiplied until they swallowed everything else. I wasn't asked what I thought or how I felt. I was assigned responsibilities, given tasks that kept me useful but invisible. My presence was tolerated only as long as it served a purpose. Then, with a single decision made behind closed doors, even that fragile role was taken away. I was no longer useful. I was no longer acceptable. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that my very presence threatened to disrupt the perfection they had spent months constructing. The reasoning was never clearly explained, but it didn't need to be. I had always been the variable they couldn't control. What they failed to realize was that I had already built something beyond their reach. It began with something small and accidental, a moment so ordinary it might have been forgotten if it hadn't changed everything. From that moment grew a connection that felt steady and unforced, something that didn't demand I shrink or disappear. It was built quietly, carefully, away from judgment and expectation. It became the one place where I was not compared, not measured, not found lacking. I protected that part of my life fiercely, not because it was fragile, but because I knew exactly how easily it could be damaged by the kind of scrutiny I had grown up under. Some things deserve to exist without interference, without being dissected or diminished, so I kept it hidden, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The night everything finally collapsed, I didn't break, I didn't unravel. Instead, something inside me settled into a clarity I had never felt before. The decision that followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fueled by anger or desperation. It was simple, deliberate, and entirely my own. For the first time, I chose a future that had nothing to do with proving my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. What came after unfolded in ways I could never have predicted. Information surfaced, truths revealed revealed themselves, and the carefully constructed world my family had built began to show its cracks. The image they had spent years perfecting wasn't just flawed, it was built on foundations that couldn't withstand scrutiny, and once those foundations were exposed, everything started to shift. I had a choice in that moment. I could stay silent, step back, and let whatever happened unfold without my involvement, or I could step forward and become part of the unraveling. For most of my life, silence had been my default. It had been safer, easier, expected, but this time, silence felt like surrender, and I was done surrendering. What followed wasn't explosive at first. It was methodical, precise, almost quiet in its execution. Pieces of information found their way to the right places. Questions began to surface in circles that had once accepted everything at face value. Doubt crept in where certainty had once ruled, and once doubt takes hold, it spreads quickly. While all of this was happening, I was building something entirely separate, a life that didn't rely on appearances or approval, a future shaped by choices that were honest, even if they weren't impressive by the standards I had grown up with. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. It was grounded, real, and filled with a kind of peace I had never known before. The day everything came together didn't feel like a climax. There was no dramatic moment where everything snapped into place. Instead, it felt like a quiet alignment, as though the pieces had been moving toward this outcome all along. The truth, once fully visible, didn't need embellishment. It spoke for itself. The fallout was swift and undeniable. The same world that had once celebrated perfection turned its attention to the cracks beneath the surface. The admiration that had been so freely given was replaced with scrutiny. The certainty that had defined everything began to dissolve. And for the first time, the narrative shifted. I wasn't at the center of the chaos. I wasn't standing in the middle of it, watching it unfold firsthand. Instead, I observed it from a distance, from a place that felt removed, yet undeniably connected. Messages came and went, attempts to reach me, to explain, to justify, to repair what had already been broken beyond recognition. I didn't engage. There was nothing left to say. What I felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction or revenge in the way people often imagine. It was something quieter, something steadier. It was the absence of weight I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. It was the realization that I was no longer defined by the roles they had assigned me. The life I had once been told would never measure up had become the only thing that mattered. Not because it proved them wrong, but because it proved something far more important. I had never needed their validation to begin with. In the end, nothing unfolded the way anyone expected. Not for them, and not for me. But as everything settled into its new reality, one truth became impossible to ignore. Walking away hadn't been the loss they believed it would be. It had been the beginning of everything they said I could never have.